Well, everyone, welcome to IML 6 Behaviours of an Innovative Team webinar held by our fantastic facilitator, Shannon Cooper. Thank you, everyone, for taking your time out of your Friday to come to this webinar. I think you'll really benefit from Shannon's insight into innovation and hopefully get something out of it to take back to your team. Out of way, an introduction, my name is Scott Robson and I'm your Corporate Solutions Manager here in Victoria, Tasman, South Australia. I know some of you online will potentially recognise me, but for you, others that don't, thank you for joining us today and welcome. We hope you'll get something out of it, and we look forward eventually to a few more webinars coming up. You will see, just one. Let's get that. This is our 34 competencies of what we do here at IML. So everything that we've designed in terms of our programs, our webinars, our CPD events, and the like are based around our 34 competencies here. And I know some of our members will be familiar with this. And as you can see on the left-hand side of the screen, you've got your Managing Self, which is the basis of our Foundations of Intentional Leadership program, which is a real focus on how do you manage and lead others for yourself. Then you've got Managing, Leading the Business, and then Managing and Leading Others, which is a real focus on our Accelerate program, which also leads into our, webinar today on innovation. And I guess one of our topics in the Accelerate program is based around innovation. So really familiarise yourself with that. It's the basis of everything we do here at IML. So feel free to take that away from today. Housekeeping. I know throughout the webinar, Shannon will refer back to a number of resources, and previous webinars, the resources have been really valuable for people attending to take away and take back to their team. So throughout the presentation, he'll refer to references, and I'll see the PowerPoint slide here. If you are willing and wanting these resources, please email us at programs@managersandleaders.com.au. Timing, most importantly, we've locked in an hour here, so Shannon, we've got on a strict guideline. He'll be here for 40 minutes, which is fantastic. So thank you for your time. And we'll also leave at the end probably 10 to 15 minutes worth of questions if there's enough coming through. So throughout the journey and throughout the webinar, if you have questions, please send them through. We'll note them, and I'll come back sort of the final 10 minutes and obviously ask some probing questions for Shannon that hopefully he can answer. And well, hopefully we do that. All right. Now the most important part, as soon as you don't want to hear me talk for too long, Shannon Cooper. This is our one facilitator. Luckily enough, I met Shannon this year, and he delivers all our programs for us, in-house and external. So he delivers our foundations here in September, does our internal and external Accelerate programs, and any of you who know and obviously been involved in any sort of leadership management development training, the facilitator is the most important part of the program. Doesn't matter how good the content is, if the facilitator can't do a good job, then it makes the program really unworthwhile. So we're lucky enough to have the skills of Shannon with us here at IML, and we really value that partnership that we've generated. And little things like today doing the webinar, we think can add real value to our members and obviously non-members that are attending here today. So Shannon's a leadership and management facilitator, known for getting bold results. His refreshing, energetic, and interactive approach has been known to empower employees, thrill customers, and embed the entire organisations. For over a decade, Shannon has worked in government agencies and companies seeking big impacts, and they've asked Shannon to turn for insight and inspiration. He has worked with big, small, single, multinational companies, helping lead big impact leadership programs. His high energy, workshops, presentation have been a delight to audiences and people attending his programs. On the side, Shannon is currently studying a Master's in Entrepreneurship and Innovation at Swinburne University and has an advanced diploma in Management of Human Resources. Along with that, he's a qualified chemical engineer and has an interesting backstory that some of you may know already, but he won't delve into that today. So enough from me. I hope you really enjoyed today's presentation. Please send through your questions. Any questions, feedback, I will be back at the end, and I'm looking forward to it. So without further ado, Shannon.
Thank you, Scott. Just throw me under the bus there. I'll have folks asking me for that interesting backstory. Maybe we could include that in some of the resources that we send out a little bit later on. But it really is wonderful to be here today. Super excited to be sharing the next 40 to 45 minutes with you and talking about a topic that I think is really important in today's ever-changing dynamic world. But I've got a question for you before we launch in too quickly. And that question is, have you ever noticed that the speed of innovation is accelerating? And not just the speed, but also the impact that innovation is having on your customers, your market segment, or even society. And I think the thing that I use to describe this, I suppose, is innovation acceleration. And if you want an example of this, I reckon most of us are familiar with the backstory of the web, of course, where we had the very first browser wars between Netscape and Microsoft. And then, of course, you had the search engines, Yahoo versus Google, social networking impacts, Facebook, Twitter, and more recently, Snapchat and Instagram, of course. And, of course, something that's been happening in the last couple of days, if you've been keeping up with the news, the ongoing smartphone wars between Apple and Samsung. And of course, this innovation acceleration is not just limited to the high-tech field. In fact, we see it across a wide range of different industries and no doubt even your own when you stop to think about it. And of course, what this is the compression of time. And because of the compression of time, the life cycle of innovations and the length of time that innovations provide us with, I suppose, some competitive advantage is becoming much, much shorter. However, the impact on society and your customers is growing significantly. Now, of course, this injects a whole stack of pressure into every single industry, and many of the business leaders listening in today know exactly what I'm talking about, because the challenge for you is to keep up. How do we keep up against this backdrop of innovation acceleration? How do you deal with the pressure? How do you deal with the uncertainty of what's going to come next? And how are you going to take advantage of it? How are you going to make sure that you don't get caught off guard? What is the issues anyway? So there's a whole backstory of uncertainty that sort of exists here. But to give you a more tangible example, I suppose, of this kind of innovation acceleration that we're seeing, it can be useful to ask a question. Think about this. How long does it take to get to 50 million users, 50 million customers? Now, whether it's a product or service, let's just think about 50 million as a number. So the examples that we typically use in these types of conversations are things like the telephone. So it took the telephone 74 years to get to 50 million users. Radio, 38 years. PC, about 16, 26 years. And of course, the TV, 13 years. Now, for the internet, it took about 2 years, right? We go down the line and we look at something like Pokemon Go, and if you've got kids, you know exactly what that's about. That took 19 days to get to 50 million users, right? So that 50 million, that's a bit of a number that we might use in technology spaces. But the question for you is, what's the metric in your industry? What is the metric? What is the magic number that you use? 50 million is something that we might use in these areas, but what's the magic number for you? And I reckon, irrespective of what that number is for your industry, what you will see is a similar result as this. You will see similar acceleration occurring, and you'll have this realization of just how big the impact of innovation acceleration is happening for you. Now, of course, the real challenge here is that, of course, customers, it's your customers that are feeding this push, feeding this growth. They're becoming much more sophisticated. They've got much more information, access to information. The web, they can go out, they can read blogs, they can read review sites. They can work out whether or not you're going to be a good fit for them before they've even picked up the telephone and had a conversation with you, or whatever that might be in your caper. But of course, the thing is that the question that we've got and what we want to sort of try and address on today's webinar is, how do you deal with this? How do you address with this? How do you cope with this innovation acceleration? And to give you some tools and some ideas and some tactics to make sure that you're better equipped to cope with it. But I want to also, before we sort of go into that proper, I want to sort of go a little bit deeper and talk about the, if that's the external environment, let's flip our gaze a little bit and think about often what happens, or the innovation reality that often happens inside a lot of organisations. And there's an innovation expert, his name is Phil McKinney, and he talks about two critical issues that happen in a lot of organisations. And the first one is what we might call the innovation gap. And essentially the innovation gap is the gap between the need for innovation, the need to do something different, the need to meet changing customer needs, and the supply, the supply of new ideas, the supply of fresh approaches, the supply of different ways of doing things, right? And the second one is about innovation delay. And innovation delay is all about the time that it takes to take a new idea, to conceptualize it, to introduce it to the market, and for it to have some real tangible return on investment for an organisation or an impact to the customers that you're serving. And of course, this innovation delay in particular, the larger your organisation is, typically the bigger that delay gets, right? Big organisations, bureaucratic, lots of stuff going on. It can take a long time to take an idea into the marketplace and to execute it, and for it to have some type of impact on you. So if you're in a business where you've got both the duality of an innovation gap and an innovation delay kind of happening in duality, well, you're in trouble. And it's time for action, and that time for action is absolutely right now. So the key here, though, is to get management buying, to think about the context of A, sourcing ideas to reduce that innovation gap, but also shortening the time for execution. And again, we're going to talk a lot more about that today. The other interesting thing that I think is a nice backstory to the 6 behaviours that we're going to explore today is that when you interview business leaders and you interview executives, it's interesting to get their opinion of what they think about innovation and some of the challenges that they feel that they face. Now, Arthur D. Little, they did a study into leadership perspectives on innovation, and the research is one of the resources that we'll supply for you today. And when you ask them, hey, has innovation increased in importance over the last 10 years? Over 90% of them say, yeah, damn straight, absolutely. Innovation is much more important now than it was 10 years ago. And then when you say, okay, well, does innovation play an important role in how we assess company value? And we think about, the attractiveness of a business, and about 73% say, yeah, absolutely. Right, but then, and this is what gets really interesting for me and us here at the Institute in particular, is that when you ask those same leaders how confident they are in their ability to manage and measure innovation and the impact that innovation has on their business, it drops down to about 35%. All right, so think about this, right? More than 90% say, yep, innovation is absolutely important. 73% say it's critical in terms of the value of an organisation, but less than or about 30% are absolutely confident in their capacity to be able to measure and manage the process of innovation. Now, that's a bit of a problem because impact is on everyone's mind. We're trying to understand, what innovation do I do? What path should we go down? How do I get the best ideas? How do we execute the best ideas? How do I use this to create a sense of competitive advantage? Right, and really one of the purposes of today's webinar is to give you a framework and some tools to enable you to do that, to measure and manage the process of innovation within your teams. Another set of studies, again, one of the resources we'll share with you today, done by our Diamond Cluster, they asked a set of leaders to rank where innovation was in their top priorities. And as you can see on the slide here, that 87% of those leaders rank innovation as one of their top 5 priorities. What's also interesting is that those same leaders say that, yes, our company excels in innovation and it's good at innovation. But what's interesting, again, for me, is that got all these leaders standing up saying it's important and we're good at it. But when you really poke through it, those same leaders can't actually differentiate between incremental improvements and breakthrough innovations. Now, of course, they're both innovations. I'm not saying that innovation only happens at the breakthrough end of the spectrum. But I think what this is interesting is that in their own minds, these leaders can't discern or have a definition of what innovation even looks like to them. Is it at the breakthrough or is it at the incremental end? And this kind of means that this mindset of innovation, it leads us kind of in this nowhere land where we think that innovations happen because of some sort of crazy gift of God, where you're struck down in the shower with this brilliant idea, and we can just go out and implement it. Because without understanding the difference between incremental or breakthrough innovations or a process to management, literally a process around innovation, we literally are hoping for the best, hoping that that wonderful idea strikes us down and we're able to implement it effectively. But of course, it doesn't work like this. The reality is that innovation is actually really hard work. There's skills to be learned. There are tools to be used. And it's the skills and the tools that you can learn, and when you can become proficient at it, it allows you to excel at innovation. So you can reach the idea or fulfill the promise that you make in terms of ranking innovation as important, and fulfill the promise of saying that, yes, we are really good at innovating. It's interesting, a lot of organisations think innovation starts with a suggestion box, an ideas box kind of hanging up by the time clock and hoping that one day someone's going to put a brilliant idea into that suggestion box. And of course, if you've ever tried that, you know that very rarely, if ever, is that a very savvy approach towards starting off an innovation process. It requires work, it requires organisation, and it requires leadership. Now, let's face it though, there's also some other challenges that us as businesses are dealing with, and that is that what we want to try to do is wrestle with getting buy-in for innovation. How do we maintain a sense of business efficiency and prudency and good governance while we're fostering innovation, when we're doing things differently and we're doing things new? And that's challenging. At the same time, how do we stress bottom line results, which is absolutely critical? We're in business. We have to have a focus on our key numbers and our key metrics. So how do we do that without restricting risk-taking and innovation and new approaches? And how do we adapt to changing markets and environments whilst maintaining a sense of stability? This is critically important questions for businesses, and many of the questions that we get asked here at the Institute to help organisations deal with this. And the 6 behaviours that we're going to have a look at today are the behaviours that help us wrestle with all of these internal challenges, external challenges, and everything in between. What's wrong with the current approaches? Well, I don't want to spend too much time talking about these, but in our experience, one of the things that when we think about current approaches towards brainstorming, ideation, and innovation is that what happens is that we come up with a whole stack of ideas that are so incremental that they don't add a lot of value, or totally unrealistic, so they never get beyond the post-it note that they're written on. Or perhaps there's rarely any real follow-up anyway. We have a brainstorming session, someone's described, someone writes up all the ideas, but very rarely is there any follow-up beyond someone typing them up and flicking them out in an email. And of course, sometimes the reason that there's no follow-up is because the ideas are unrealistic, or there's a little bit of confidence that we haven't really come up with a good idea, or there's not a better idea out there. But I think the biggest challenge is this last one, the lack of leadership and organisational support. And again, the framework we want to look at today is designed to give you some tools and some techniques so that you can provide the appropriate level of leadership and the appropriate level of organisational support to drive innovation and creativity within your team. So the framework is kind of how we solve it. And what we're going to look at today is 6 key behaviours. And these behaviours are sort of based on our own research and findings here at the Institute, and also based on a framework that was developed by a company called IDEO in the United States. So let's hook into these ones. So the first behaviour that we want to look at is purpose. And having a purpose is an extremely important creative quality of innovative teams. And it's also first for a reason. And the reason that it's first is because it sets the scope and direction for the organisation and the team. An organisation without, or a team without a purpose, it's a bit like a, a bit like a watch without a dial. What's the point? If we don't have a purpose and we don't have a strong, consistent intent to innovate, then we're literally, again, flapping in the breeze. And I also have to say, by purpose, we don't mean make money. That's not what we're talking about here. Purpose is about why the team or your organisation exists beyond making money. You know, in the news a lot lately, there has been a lot about the 50th anniversary of the moon landing, and I think that's an interesting case study in itself. When you think about what happened, I had to write the date down so that I remembered, May 25th, 1961, when John F. Kennedy Jr. stood there and announced to a special joint session of Congress the dramatic and ambitious goal of putting a American man on the moon and bringing him home safely by the end of the decade. Like, you think about that, a big, audacious dream, a sense of purpose, a stake in the ground that really sort of galvanized the nation and launched a whole movement. That one simple statement of intent and aspiration got things going around the world. And of course, it was, I reckon, you look back on history, and it was one of the greatest mobilizations of resources that we've ever really seen. But of course, what was so compelling about that purpose, and why were the people so committed? Well, fundamentally, Kennedy invited people into a purpose. He asked them to be part of something that was bigger and to bring their gifts and talents to help them participate in something that was bigger than themselves or bigger than the isolation where they work. And of course, despite all the skeptics that said it couldn't be done, you know, July 20, 1969, that Neil Armstrong took that small step for himself and a massive major step for mankind. You know, a stunning achievement built around a stake in the ground from JFK all those years earlier. And what's also interesting is that there's, you know, broad estimates kind of say that when that initial statement was made by JFK, we knew about 15% of what we needed to know to get a man on the moon. So it wasn't like he made that intent knowing that we had all of the technology, the resources, the knowledge and wisdom that we needed to actually do it. So here's the question for you. You know, what if your team, what if your people were inspired to unleash their creativity around a compelling purpose each and every day? And that's what we mean by purpose. And it doesn't have to be something sexy. You know, it just has to be something that's meaningful for your team. We often talk about MERVAC, the Australian organisation. They have a wonderful purpose that they that used to sort of drive them, and that is, and I had to write this down as well so I don't forget it, but it's reimagining urban life. That's their purpose. That's what they're there to do. Now, that on its own, you kind of look at it and go, well, that's, you know, that's reimagining urban life. It could be meaningful, but it's, you know, it's what does it actually mean? It sounds like a typical mission statement that any organisation might have, right? But the difference with MERVAC is that they actually live and breathe this purpose. They incorporate it into everything that they do, from their training, right? So from day one, people are learning what it means to act in their role and help the organisation achieve its purpose of reimagining urban life, right? And it also built into all of the metrics that kind of exist within that organisation. And they have a wonderful thing called a Hatch innovation program, which really is the centrepiece of this reimagining urban life. And this is important because the purpose starts to live in the hands of the people, in the hands of the creators, and it starts to have real meaning. So here's, you know, there's three questions that I'd encourage those that are listening today to reflect on and think about with respect to their purpose. First of all, have you got a purpose? And if you have, and you want to know whether it's likely to unleash, you know, creativity and innovation and become a cornerstone of the behaviours within your team, there's three questions. And the first question is it clear? Is there a sense of clarity around that purpose? Do the people in your organisation or team actually understand the purpose? Or, you know, is everyone on the same page? And of course, it's easy to find out. Just ask them. Ask them what the purpose is. Ask them what they think it means, and see what happens. See if you get you know, different answers or the same answers. The second question to ask is about usefulness. Is the purpose useful enough to help the people in your team make decisions and give them the courage to make decisions? Does it help the team members decide what to do, what not to do, what innovations and ideas to look at, what opportunities to look at, and what opportunities to perhaps ignore for now or ignore forever? You can quickly ruin an organisation's purpose if you're kind of like, oh yeah, well, this is our purpose, but we're going to run over here and do a stack of different things anyway. Yeah, that's our purpose, but don't worry about that because we're going to focus on this. This diminishes the impact of your purpose. So clarity and usefulness. The third question is passion, right? Does it really get people fired up and get them to bring their best to work each and every day? Right, but the thing is though, these purpose statements, they're not always that sexy. They're not always that necessarily looking that great on paper, but doesn't matter what it is. If it's worded in a way that ignites passion in your people, it doesn't matter what it looks like on people. It's what it really means to them that is critically important. Right? So look for reasons to 3 questions to ask about that purpose, and ask yourself, have you got a clear state of intent to be innovative and creative? So let's have a look at the second key behaviour, which is about awareness. And this is about taking the time to look outside the walls of your organisation. And of course, this can be a real struggle in a lot of organisations, particularly bigger ones. There's all these internal processes, sort of stuff going on inside the 4 walls of your organisation. There's a colleague that needs help here, this meeting to go to. There's this thing over here that I kind of need to deal with right now. Just stuff that kind of takes our focus away from our customers and forces us to navel gaze. Of course, that's, I suppose, a good thing if we're productive. But what it means is that your customers, the stuff outside the 4 walls, is just that little bit further away. Your market, your customers, the trends, their decisions, the things that they're looking for to inform their decisions, other industries, technologies, they're just that little bit further away. So you can get out of touch with these things pretty damn quickly if you're not developing a team that behaves with a broad sense of external awareness. So there's 3 sort of areas that we encourage organisations to have a look at. And we talk about these in our Accelerate program. We talk about market insights or market awareness, customer awareness, and technology awareness. And because of time today, I'm not going to go through all of those, but perhaps the most important one here is customer awareness. There was a recent IBM Institute study, and I think this is part of your resource packets today, and it said that 76% of customers expect organisations to understand their individual needs, which means that it's increasingly important for organisations to be pushing the envelope of how they're connecting with their customers and the types of conversations that they're having. And what I mean by pushing the envelope, I think that that means don't just have a telephone call. You actually need to get out of the office. You actually need to get out there and immerse yourself in the customer's world. Get out there and do some field work. And that can be, observing customers. It might be going through the process of purchasing your own product from a customer perspective. It might be, visiting the other stores that your customers go to. It might be, conducting some online research to kind of synthesize all this. But you just got to get out there. You've got to get out there and talk to your customers. I think that too many organisations rely too heavily on online research or data or telephone conversations. But customers are often behave in a very different way, or using your product or your service or engaging with your business in a way that's very different than what they'll articulate if they're on a telephone call with you or something like that. So yeah, get out of those 4 walls and encourage your team to get out there and do some field work. Encourage them to go out and observe customers and have some fair income conversations with them. Like I say, the flip side is we often think that there's enough there for us to rely on, but when you look at innovative teams, you'll find that they're developing that awareness by going out and spending some field time, real time, face time with their customers at the coalface. The third one we want to talk about, the third behaviour, is about experimentation. And here's what's happened, right? So imagine that if you've got a purpose, and that purpose unlocks the awareness, and you've got people going out there talking to customers, watching what competitors do, and watching their interactions and so forth. What happens now is that we start to get all of these great ideas coming forward, because our people get all inspired, they get all excited, so all these ideas start to bubble up. And of course, then you'll be like, well, now what? Got all these ideas, hundreds of ideas, maybe thousands of ideas. What now? What's the next step? We're starting to build that process and that innovation pipeline. So the next step and the next key behaviour that we want to encourage our teams to have is about running a series of experiments. And by experiments, I don't mean pilots. Linda Hill, an author of the book Creative Genius, she has a wonderful TED Talk again, which is something that we're going to share with you as part of our resources today. She talks about this distinction between pilots and experiments. Experiments are about learning, right? When you get a negative outcome in an experiment, you're still really learning about something, and you're still sort of informing the decisions that you make to roll the innovation forward. So an experiment is about, just a small thing, whereas a pilot, pilots are often about proving yourself right or wrong, When they don't work, there's someone or something to blame, right? But as I said, it's very different with experiments. So what you want to do is encourage your team, support your team, empower your team to start small by creating a minimum viable version of the product or service that we're looking to kind of, determine whether or not it's got any legs. So this might be a bare bones website, it might be a pop-up space, a storyboard of a new process, a manual dry run, whatever it is, a Lego model, whatever it might be. Do something, a small scale experiment to get it in the face of your target customers. And by doing so, you can get some quick and dirty insights and work about the usability and market fit without going and committing to the extensive resources that it might take to roll out a fully blown final version or pilot. Now, of course, this, first cut data, it might not be particularly sort of qualitative or useful, but that's not what we're looking for in an experiment. We're just looking for some sort of validation that the assumptions that we've made about our ideas are kind of correct, and should we move forward. And this also means that you can prevent making sort of costly mistakes with expensive pilot programs that don't yield any results. So, I suppose one of the classic cases there is Tony Chess's early prototyping of the Zappos website. And if you don't know the early prototyping story of the Zappos website, you should totally Google that. Not right now, do it after the webinar, but totally Google that and look that up. It's a wonderful example of really quick and dirty prototyping to work out whether or not people would actually buy shoes online. But what it does is allowing your team to conduct experiments, allows your team, or it helps your team, teaches your team to how quickly resolve problems and develop iterative ideas of thinking as well. And that's one of the other things that I love about experimentations, is that it fuels the creative juices within your team. So, and we've all heard the famous stories, James Dyson creating 5,000 failed prototypes, Thomas Edison and his journey in creating the light bulb. We've all heard of these stories. We all know the value of experimentation. The question for you folks listening on this webinar today is that, what types of minimum viable products, what types of prototypes are you encouraging your team to develop, and are you empowering them to run those experiments? Because if you're not, you're perhaps missing an opportunity to really close up that innovation gap and shorten that innovation delay that might be existing within your business. And particularly in this day and age, it's really easy to get a quick and dirty website up. It's near enough to free. 3D printing allows us to create all kinds of prototypes quite quickly and quite cheaply. So some of the barriers that used to exist in terms of running experiments and creating minimum viable products just don't exist anymore. Even storyboarding. There's you can do that nice and quickly with some pretty cheap online programs and the like. So lots of trial and error, lots of false starts, lots of missteps, lots of mistakes. That's often what happens here at the experimentation phase. But I tell you what, better do that over a small experiment rather than a fully blown sort of thing that you've rushed through that ends up costing you a lot of money and is a flop, but also costs you a lot of money in terms of failure as well, and perhaps even market reputation or customer reputation. So again, that question for you all here, what's an example? Think about your work. What's an example of a quick prototype that you could build to test a new idea within your team? How can you role model that behavior for your team starting on Monday, if you like? The storyboard, the 3D model, even a Lego model. I love Lego. If you've been to my workshops, you know how much I love Lego. So let's have a look at our next one, which is about collaboration. And collaboration is really important for an innovative team to be able to do. Essentially, what we're talking about here is breaking down those organisational silos that exist, and creating multi-dimensional teams that allow you to address a multitude of issues very early on to see what problem or circumvent a problem that might occur further on in the pipeline. See, it's interesting. Many leaders say, collaboration is really important. We need to have a diversity of people on our teams. Yet in reality, in this day and age, still teams, organisations structure their teams around technical competency areas. And it's important, and we should do that to a significant degree. But we also know that we need lots of different ideas and viewpoints and perspectives to be truly innovative. So you've got to unleash the talents and passions of many different types of people and harness them into work that is really useful. So here's some of the key essentials here, and really what it's about is enabling and encouraging your team to collaborate with others across the organisation. There was a Nielsen poll, and again we've included this in your resource pack, that says that there is a positive relationship between the number of collaborators actively working on a new idea and its performance with customers. In fact, the research found that ideas developed by teams of 3 or more people have a 156% greater chance of appealing and to customers and having some market success than those developed by teams that consist of just 1 or 2 people. Right, so there's an interesting research again that you can read that sort of shows that correlation. But it's not just about the number of sheer people that are contributing. It's also about the degree of variation in their roles, backgrounds and approaches and so forth. And what we know is that involving people from different functional roles and different a cross-section of expertise and background will substantially improve a new idea's chances of success and having an impact on the market or positive ROI on your organisation. And the Nielsen results show that when you can get more than 4 functional groups kind of collaborating and talking about an idea and pulling it apart, the execution of the idea increases by something like about 70%. So it's quite significant. But of course, there's a whole stack of barriers that get in the way. Our collaboration, it's too hard, it's more work, it's a hassle. You know, there's a whole host of different barriers that often stop us from either allowing our teams to collaborate or sometimes just stopping us from wanting to collaborate. But for every, I say that as a leader, if you're serious about innovation, you're serious about that intent, then you get out of the way and you make collaboration a possibility for your team. And there's a few ground rules here. I think that collaboration has to have some structure. So if you're going to get a team together to explore a potential new idea, then give it some structure. Make sure that you connect your team members as well. I know that we use a lot of technology these day and age, but if you can get them face to face, get them looking at each other so that they can look at those non-verbal cues and talk about things in a physical setting, that's often more useful than an over-reliance on technology. Encourage peer recognition, work out what are the boundaries, how are we going to recognise and reward each other in a collaborative environment. Also make sure the managers are involved as well, get their buy-in. Like if we're going to take a team member from one team and second them into a project or a cross-functional team, etc., make sure that we have got that management buy-in. That's critically important as well. And use technology. Like I said, we want to get people face-to-face, but where we can use collaborative team-based technology, it can be a wonderful way of kind of reducing some of those barriers or reasons why. But a bit like I said, experiment. Don't be scared to experiment. Cross-functional collaborative teams come in all kinds of different sizes, which means there's all kinds of different methods to allow teams to collaborate. So tap into your own pool, work out what works best for you. But fundamentally, look for, encourage, empower, and unlock opportunities for your team to collaborate. Greater collaboration. Oh, it's darky. No, we're back on. Collaboration is a key behaviour of creative and innovative teams. Let's look at empowerment. We'll race through these last two, and then we'll wrestle with some of the questions that we've got. So the 5th behaviour is empowered, and I've mentioned this term multiple times throughout the webinar. Because once we've got our collaborative cross-functional team, the question is, well, now what? Well, fundamentally, we need to empower them to get on with it. Empowerment is really about creating that key path for people to be able to move forward, trusting them to do the right thing. It's about giving them the right tools, the right structure, helping them understand how to tackle those problems, and then allowing them to use their own judgment to solve problems of the team. And if you haven't already made the link, if you've created a strong enough purpose, then they can be trusted to make good discerning decisions about what it is they're going to work on and where those priorities sit. Dan Pink talks a lot about empowerment. He's done lots in that space about empowerment and autonomy. And if you haven't heard of Dan Pink, Pink like the colour, you should totally Google him and read some of his stuff. He talks a lot about this idea of empowerment and autonomy. But essentially, some of the factors to consider here is does your team, do they feel empowered enough to challenge the status quo? Are they empowered enough to bring up some ideas, even if it might seem a little bit counter to some of the assumptions that the rest of the organisation might make? You know, I suppose, look, the best organisations often happen when someone brings up an idea that is counterintuitive to the rest of the organisation. I mean, if the organisation knew that there was already a better way to do it, they'd probably already be doing it. So it actually requires someone to feel empowered enough, trusted enough to say, you know what, I think there's a different approach to doing that. Also, too, do people understand how to make decisions? Do they understand the process for making decisions in your organisation? The more they understand in terms of the parameters and the guidelines and the process for making business decisions in your organisation, the more empowered they're likely to feel. When we're working in a process or in a team where we don't know what the framework is or what the guidelines are, or the guidelines are too tight, we tend to become very disenchanted, very disempowered, and very unmotivated. So, you know, I often think of the example, a quick one, and many of you listening might already know the story of Netflix. You know, I don't know, this is probably 5 or 6 years ago now. Might be a little bit off, but Netflix back then was already on a pretty good growth and trajectory. But what happened was, and they were hiring some pretty clever people. They were paying them some good money, and you know, but they realised that they actually weren't growing in the way that they wanted to. They were like, "Hey, we've got these clever people. We've got some good ideas, but what's going on? Why aren't we growing as quickly as we should be?" And what happened was that they were starting to shut down. As they got bigger, they got more bureaucratic, and they were starting to shut down some of the judgment of those clever people. Those clever people were feeling disempowered and not bringing their best selves to the organisation. So what they did was they said, right, we need to get out of people's way, essentially. So they sort of went through this kind of freedom of responsibility movement, which is basically about stepping back the bureaucracy and helping people to feel more empowered. So what they did, they got all the binders that they'd rammed full of policies and procedures and all these documents that told people how to do this, you know, when this happens, do this, and when A happens, when B, all the rest, you know what I'm talking about. And they went from all of these binders and multi-page documents down to a pretty much a single statement. And that single statement was, act in Netflix's best interest. That was kind of their policy and procedure that they gave people. And then they got out of their way and they empowered people and trusted people to fulfill that criteria. And of course, you know, the rest, as they say, is history. Look where that organisation is now, a real disruptor in that place. And this happens all the time. When people can respond quickly, when they feel empowered, they move through problems and challenges a hell of a lot more quickly. So here's a question for you, right? Leadership is the secret sauce here. If you want to build an organisation, you want to build a team that can innovate time and time again, then really get to the essence of what leadership is about, and understand that one of the truisms is that leadership is about creating the space where people feel empowered, where they're willing and able to do great work. So the question for you folks sitting here on the webinar today is, are your team empowered? Do they know how decisions are made? Are they clear on the guidelines? Are they clear on the boundaries? Or are they micromanaged to within an inch of their lives where they're disempowered and the ideas of creativity are kind of strangled out of them? Yeah. And the final behaviour that we want to talk about here is improvement. And IDEO calls it refinement. We call it improvement. And this is about, okay, so we've got our ideas and it's kind of getting out there into the marketplace. Improvement is all about that creative problem solving that happens through technical execution. What happens is a lot of organisations kind of rush their ideas through and then kind of say, well, we had a good idea and we put it out in the marketplace. That's it, off we go. But of course, in reality, we know that just because we've got a good idea and we've validated it through some experiments and some internal conversations, doesn't actually mean that it's going to be an elegant solution that delights your customers. So we actually need to give people in charge of the execution of the idea or the rollout of the idea, the freedom and the autonomy to be able to refine and improve the idea as it's rolling forward. You know, yeah, it's about your capacity to be able to carry out your ideas and know that just because everything is kind of validated, when the rubber hits the road, there can be a whole stack of problems and challenges that you might not have foreseen. So the final behaviour of a creative and innovative team is that they're also, that idea of empowerment extends beyond just the initial execution, but throughout the execution to be able to iterate and refine and really get that product or that idea working and pumping absolutely beautifully. Yeah, because when we put an idea out there, very rarely is it static. And of course, this final behaviour, you can also link that through all the other behaviours. For example, it's your purpose that allows you to say what you're going to say yes to, what you're going to say no to, and then those improvement decisions are being made in a fair way. Are we going to, right, we've identified this problem, are we going to do it, are we not going to do it? Well, that can come back to the purpose and also some of the insights that you've got through some of these other behaviours. Right, so here's our 6 sort of behaviours that we've gone through relatively quickly today. Purpose, awareness, experimentation, collaboration, empowerment and improvement. So based on some work from IDEO and fleshed out with some of our own thoughts here at the Institute. And the idea, the order of these qualities also matters and it's deliberate. Many companies often get stuck in the improvement phase or the empowerment phase, and they wonder why their people don't feel empowered, and it's often due to a lack of purpose. Or we get to the experimentation phase and we're running all these failed experiments, and the reason is because our experiments are way off because we haven't done good at the awareness phase. Or we get out there and we encourage our people to become aware, but they don't know what they're looking for because there's no purpose. So absolutely, the sequence of these steps matter as well. So I hope you've enjoyed that, and I hope it makes sense for you. These behaviours really can, when you think about it, when you attack each one of these with intent, it gives you a method that can help truncate that innovation delay, but also shorten up that innovation gap, which will equip you and your teams with a lot more sort of confidence and a lot more impact in dealing with a very difficult, volatile, fast-moving environment that you're all working in, irrespective of your industry. So yeah, look, if you've got any questions, we've got some Q&A time, so you can email those through, as we said. And I think, Scott, you've probably got some that you want to kick us off with. I'm going to have a quick sip of water before I go. A lot of stuff to get through in a short time, but also we can email you some of the supporting resources that will help you understand some of the things we've gone through today.
Firstly, thank you, Shannon. I actually had a few messages while you're online, and people were absolutely thrilled with your presentation. And hopefully you can take some away. I know personally, I wouldn't say I'm the most innovative person there is, but figuring out ways to probably being a bit more innovative and how I can harness that is really good. But I do have a few questions that have come through, and
yeah,
feel free to fire them through, and I'm more than happy to read them out. I think we've got 5-10 minutes, but this one, I hope you can answer it.
I hope so too.
Some of the greatest innovations have been products or services that customers didn't even know they needed.
That's right.
How can we encourage teams to go beyond existing technology or customer demands or other data and truly develop disruptive products/services?
Yeah, great question. Thank you. Great question. Lots of interesting points in there. The word disruptive, the words of existing technologies and encouraging our people. Even that question is probably the genesis of another webinar. But I suppose simply it comes down to that awareness, and as the person who sent that question is that customers are often not aware of what they want. But here's what I also know to be true, is that if you just are talking to your customers, yeah, how's it going? Yeah, everything good? Yeah, fine. Nobody's got any ideas on how we can improve it? Yeah, not really. Well, it wouldn't be good if you could, get rid of that automated. So what happens is that when we have those simple interactions, even on a telephone call or even a face-to-face coffee chat, what actually happens is that we don't actually learn anything new. We certainly don't learn anything disruptive. But when you're actually out there watching, when you can actually watch what your customers go through, what you'll find is the customers have all these little workarounds. Yeah. They have all these little shortcuts that they are already implementing to make it easier to use your product or service. Yeah. Right? They have these little hacks, these little things that they're doing. They're using your products and services in ways that you wouldn't expect, and they're completely unconscious or unaware that that's what they're doing. Yeah. But when you get out of your four walls of your office and you sit there and you watch them, right? You sit there and you watch, you know, when they're queuing up in your coffee shop, or they are attending one of your events, or they are trying on your garments, or they're on your website. When you understand how they're interacting with those things, you will notice these little shortcuts. And it's those little shortcuts that give you the insights to those disruptive ideas. So I know it's a short way of answering that person's question, but the basic thing you can do from the get-go to encourage them to do that is to encourage them and almost use your foot, get them out of the four walls and get them out there looking at how the customers interact.
Perfect, great answer. Thanks for that. We've got another one. Is there a good approach to experimentation in a managed services environment?
Excellent. So managed services, yeah, look, or any service environment, absolutely. So to give you something that you could start doing straight away, I like storyboarding. So imagine you've got an organisational process, and whether it be an internal one or one that leans out towards your customers, storyboarding is a great way to do that. Now, if you're not familiar with a storyboard is kind of like a fancy term for a comic. A storyboard is a way of sort of mapping something out and having different sort of players in it. And it can be a great way of presenting it to customers or internal customers and walking them through what you're thinking to get that quick and dirty feedback associated with an experiment. So yeah, because you might not have a physical thing, but a storyboard, there's other methods as well, but a storyboard is usually the most accessible if it's something that you're trying for the first time.
Super, thank you. Now there, research from Professor Danny Sampson shows that some managers will act in their own best interest.
Yes. Yep.
This will always be a stumbling block to innovation.
Yep. Yep.
What are your views?
Yeah, I suppose very simply, absolutely agree. Which is one of the reasons why a lot of leaders don't encourage their team to collaborate. Because if I am going to participate in innovative processes, because if I'm allowing my team member to do that, then I'm not allowing them to do the stuff that they're paid to do, or the stuff that's contributing to my own KPIs or my own bonus. So absolutely agree. But I also think that, and this will sound trite and naive, and it is interesting because it's one of the things that we talk about from a leadership competency framework in our IML framework, is that when you've got a really strong purpose and a really uniform and purpose that's living in an organisation, what happens is that the leaders tend to get out of their own way. And those that don't tend to get out of their own way actually don't fit in that organisation. It's because you're behaving in a way that's not consistent with the rest of the organisation. When you've got all these other leaders saying, hey, Scott, we want a member of your team to come and help us, and you're constantly saying, no, can't afford it, they don't have the time, I don't want to do that, because acting out of self-interest, very soon you'll be the outcast within that team. Sure. But there are, of course, some other things as well. It's deeper than that, but fundamentally a strong purpose. Agree with the question, and a strong purpose is a way of unraveling that.
Beautiful. Thanks, Emma. We'll have a couple more. We don't have much time, but how many iterations of any innovation idea would you expect?
Yeah. How long's a piece of string? Interesting. IDEO's research says that you should always have innovation success is significantly increased when you have 5 or more experiments kind of running in parallel. So, you know, 5 or more sort of experiments sort of happening. But one of the things I often say, it's like, and I say that the engineer in me, the science in me, says, well, you actually have to do enough experiments to validate your assumptions or not. Because what happens is you might run enough experiments and go, actually, this was a pretty crappy idea. We thought it was a good idea, but it ain't that great. Or you'll conduct enough experiments, say, you know what, we've got enough data to satisfy the internal stakeholders to say, actually, we've got something here that we should invest some more time and energy in. Now, it varies. Sometimes it might be 1 or 2. Sometimes when people get very attached to some ideas, you might run more. But the other thing I would also say is you should always have a stop loss. A stop loss where you say, you know what, we're going to run some experiments over this period of time, or we're going to run this many experiments. And if we get to that point and we don't have enough good validated data by that point, we're going to be out. Yeah, we're out. We're out for now, or we're out forever. Now, sometimes what happens is you see a competitor do it, and it might just be that they did that one experiment that you didn't do, and you'll have a bit of a face slap moment, but that's what happens. Super.
All right. one of the most important questions that are not easily measured refers to the measurement of innovation.
Yeah.
Do you have any advice you can give on how to measure innovation in a business to help in maximising the result?
No, well, kind of. Yes and no. Thank you for the question. I think making my brain work on a Friday afternoon. Yes, I do. I think that there absolutely has to be a way of measuring it. But the reality is that depending on how disruptive the innovation is, like sometimes a disruptive innovation can be much more difficult to measure, certainly in the short term. And when you've got organisations or your organisational culture is we focus on short-term measures, that can be very, very challenging. Whereas incremental things can be easier, like we've saved X time, or we've saved X dollars, or our customer engagement scores have gone up, our employee scores have gone up. So I always think, what's the linkage between the experiment you're running or the innovation you're running and the lever that's going to pull on within your business. But that's a simplistic answer, an intuitive answer. But the more detailed answer is, if I had that answer, I probably wouldn't be sitting here.
Yeah, sure.
There's a lot of theory. There's a lot of, again, Phil McKenney writes a lot of great articles on how to measure innovation impact, both internally and externally. He talks a lot about this gap and delay. But I always, my rule of thumb is, okay, we're working on this innovation. How does this already sit within the internal metrics that we use, and how do I align it? Because if you're trying to measure something that is completely out of kilter with your normal metrics within your business, good luck trying to get some support for that.
Yeah, beautiful. We'll go two more, then we're done
great.
for time.
Excellent.
But this is probably an individualized one.
Yeah.
I work from a big company. Is there a way of classifying people who are more innovative than others in order to get the best results from my company? Is there an assessment or a tool that I can use to find out who are more innovative in my workforce?
Well, good. There are. There's lots of different tools and things out there that can assess people's creativity. I love them all and I hate them all. I love them all because they're interesting. But you know why I hate them? You know why I hate them? Because I know, again, some of you are sitting there going, well, that's terribly naive, Shannon. But in my experience, my personal experience and the work that we do here, everyone is creative.
Yeah.
What it is about, it's not about who's more creative and who's not creative. It's about how do you as a leader tap into those different elements of creativity. And again, something we talk a lot about in our programs and as part of our IML framework. So I often talk about how do you as a leader unlock the diversity of creativity that sits. Now, there are absolutely some people who have creative strengths. Some people's creative strengths are about that initial ideation. Some people's creative strength is about problem solving. Some people's creative strength is about how to sort of sell or pitch the idea. So it's different. And when you understand that, that's how you unlock it. But as a simple, I don't think we've put it in the resource pack. Maybe we could. But even just a simple Google search of creativity, benchmarking tools and stuff like that will give you a bit of an insight. But look at them, get curious about them, and ignore them. Just look for the creative qualities that exist within your team.
All right. Last one.
Is it easy?
We're done. I'll let you answer that. Do you have any tips for keeping the momentum and innovation alive when leading a team remotely? Which I think is a very good question.
Yeah. Geez. My views on that are changing a lot. I think as collaborative technology gets better and better, if you're willing to embrace that technology and use it, that can be really helpful. I think if you go back a few years ago where, that sort of, things like, Slack or even Microsoft sort of Teams and all those kind of innovative technologies, Basecamp and all that type of stuff is a lot cooler now than what it was. And it's making conversations that happen online happen a lot more sort of fluidly. I think that I go back to what I said in the webinar. The more often you can get people face to face, the easier it is to unlock the powers of collaboration. I think for initial ideation sessions or initial sort of kickoff meetings and stuff like that, if you can get people face to face, that's a good place to start. But also, I think with remote teams, one of the other key things is structure. How is this going to work? Structure and accountability. Sounds a little bit counterintuitive, particularly if you're familiar with sort of agile and all that type of stuff, innovation. But again, we're in business, right? Innovation is a function of business, and there needs to be some semblance of structure. So often when I'm working with remote teams or teams that are geographically dispersed and we're working on innovations, it's always, what's the structure of this team, who's doing what, and what are their accountabilities? And once that's structured, embrace technology. So that'd be 2 tips that I'd give very quickly.
Right, super.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks very much.
My pleasure. Thank you for everyone for spending your Friday lunchtime with me. I hope there was some value in that for you. Please email us to get the resources. We'd be more than happy to do that and send those to you. Or if there's any sort of other questions that you'd like to do, please reach out to Scott. We'd be more than happy to have a chat.
Super. Hey, thanks very much for your time. And hopefully everyone online got something out of today and can take back into the workplace, which is the most important and the reason we put it on. So thank you, Shannon. We're lucky enough to have you here for the last 40 minutes and some of the questions. And so not everyone got the question answered, but we'll email a response to that in the next sort of couple of hours. But just quickly before we go, what's next? I know there's a few webinars lined up, so please keep an eye out on our webpage for upcoming webinars. We've got about 6 to 8 planned until the end of the year that are free. So please keep an eye on that. But these are our most important ones coming up here. We've got the Foundations program starting in September in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, Adelaide. And obviously Shannon here will run the one in Melbourne, and super for your new and emerging leaders who might need a bit of support if they're going to leadership position or have just arrived. Super program. Then obviously Accelerate, which we've touched on here today with innovation. That's one of the topics that we cover off. Another program that's starting in September throughout Brisbane, Sydney, and Melbourne. Again, Shannon in Melbourne. So you know, if you're interested in that or have some middle managers or maybe having some challenges or want to upskill, we'd love to hear from you and potentially attend the program. So
hey, just before you go, and if it's not on there, but if you're a member and you earn this webinar, which you are, on the 11th of September, we've got a masterclass
on innovation
on this very topic. So we're going to, if today it piqued your interest and you want to dig a little bit deeper into some tactics and some tools, come along to the masterclass here in Melbourne on the 11th of September. We'd love to have you here, and I'd really love to meet you.
Super. Any questions? Email programs@managersandleaders.com.au, and that's us for Friday.
Have a great Friday.
Thank you. Thank you.